Jeongmin Kim, again, is Seoul-based correspondent at NK News, mainly covering North Korean state media and inter-Korean news. And thank you very much, Jeongmin Kim, for joining us early in the morning over here. And Rob Lauler is Daily NK's English page manager and also oversees the organization's weekly newsletter and has previously worked with other North Korean human rights NGOs here in South Korea. So again, it's a privilege to have you guys join us. Thank you very much. And we will jump right into a couple of questions and then take audience questions. So I think, first up, there's the obvious question. The North Korean government is claiming that there are no cases in North Korea, no cases of COVID-19 in the whole country. But it seems like you guys have both done reports that tell a different story. So what can we say about what's happening on the ground with the coronavirus situation in North Korea, recently? And maybe Rob, if you could jump into that one first.
Yeah, so I think, broadly speaking, it's highly unlikely North Korea has avoided an outbreak, despite the fact that it did take quick measures to shut down the border with China back in late January. North Korea hasn't been transparent about epidemics that occur in the country, and frankly, its medical infrastructure is considered one of the world's worst in terms of healthcare efficiency. Sino-NK earlier reported on the shutdown of the country's major ports, including Siniju on the North Korean border, and along with reports that the authorities have restricted mobility across city and provincial borders. The numbers are difficult to confirm. I mean, Sino-NK has received reports of deaths following respiratory issues and fevers from areas throughout the country since February, and we put out a map of the deaths in early March, with a total of at least 23 deaths and 82 people quarantined. Again, these are based off of sources, in specific parts of the country, and they were based on statistics from the Central Emergency Disease Control Command, and obviously these numbers only give a glimpse of what's going on, but most of the deaths in those under quarantine were either visitors to China or met with such persons. But the authorities, to the best of our knowledge, have ruled most of these deaths due to what they call acute pneumonia. So they're not calling this necessarily deaths by coronavirus. And more recently, many of you probably saw that Daily NK reported that almost 200 soldiers had died during the period stretching from January to February. And again, to be clear, that this number is based off a report seen by a military source in North Korea, and the figure may indeed include those who have died of things outside of the coronavirus. The fact is that the military is not the people. Soldiers face perhaps better conditions than many in North Korea, but life as a soldier in the country can be very difficult. There's food shortages. There's soldiers, in some cases they're literally tilling the fields outside of their own military bases to make up for the shortages that food that they don't receive from the government. And we've also heard that North Korean authorities are cremating corpses. People have died. And this, suggests that, while, there might not be, this might not be a specific outbreak, the authorities are definitely worried of, about, the what could happen with dead bodies in terms of, spread of the virus. And recently, this is just this week, we've heard that, from North Hamgyong province that, 11 prisoners died in the Cheonggori prison, and that was after suffering respiratory problems and fevers. And so, broadly speaking, we receive reports from various parts of the country that suggest there is an outbreak, and there are, and the North Korean authorities are taking measures to control it as best they can. Well,
thanks very much for that overview, Rob. It's it's obviously very concerning to imagine the extent of what could be happening inside the country. It seems pretty clear that there is an outbreak from the various reporting, and it may be one of those things where we never know exactly how bad it has been, even in the future. Because as you mentioned, a lot of these deaths, they seem like they might be due to coronavirus. They may show similar symptoms, but even other countries are struggling to report on accurate numbers, maybe, and so. In North Korea, we may see an uptick of deaths from, that may look like pneumonia in some cases or associated with fever and so on. But if it's even affecting relatively young people in the military, then that really does point to a very grave situation. Jeongmin, could you add to that picture from the sources that NK News has?
All right, so unlike Daily NK, we haven't reported on any suspected cases in North Korea, but we have been reporting on the quarantine measures that North Korea has been taking, which is unprecedentedly strict. Foreign embassy staffs and diplomats were under more than 1 month quarantine, and it was almost like a house arrest hearing from them. And but some of them flew out on March 9, and the quarantine has been relaxed a little bit, but it's still very strict. Also, tourism was suspended in late January. Flights and trains to China and Russia, they were suspended. And also there is a very tight control at the import-export quarantine stations as well. And they are keeping imported items, all the cargoes, under isolation for 10 days. That was the order from the government. And they also called off Pyongyang Marathon, which was supposed to be April 12th. And Pyongyang Film Festival was also postponed by a month. And also when it comes to domestic quarantine measures and hygiene propaganda, they're using the state media on a daily basis to educate citizens to always wear masks, wash hands, disinfect their home and offices, and don't ride the bus unless you are wearing a mask, or you shouldn't go to any public gatherings. As in for education, the spring semester has been postponed just like in Seoul. And Premier Kim Jae-ryong and other high-level officials visited quarantine command and relevant factories to show that they are caring about this issue. And also, Yangdeok Hot Springs Resort, it was opened recently. And public amenities like the Yangdeok One and Masikryong Ski Resort, they were temporarily shut down as of February 25th, according to Rodong Sinmun. So they are taking a very strict measures, and although they are continuing to insist that there has been 0 cases in North Korea and that they are the clean land, they seem to be very much concerned about the issue. And I think what it seems is that they're taking a strategy of a lockdown. We can't exactly say why they are doing that, but we can presume that because of what Rob mentioned, like a very bad healthcare infrastructure, and maybe the inability to test enough, to have enough test kits, it's making them to choose not to open up to the world, like even worse than they have been before. So they are basically more of a hermit kingdom than even more so than before.
Right. Yeah, you shared a little bit there about the government's kind of state media messaging to the people. I wonder, what do we know about the level of information that the North Korean people are aware of in terms of what's going on, both around the world and in their own country with the coronavirus? Obviously, it's from number 1 to 10 in the headlines in pretty much every country in the world. What's it like in North Korea in terms of what people know, and maybe do they have information about their local situation as well? It's an extreme comparison, but in South Korea, there's constant updates on how many people have got it in your local district area and which places they visited and so on. Across the border to the north, what do we know about what people understand of the situation in their country, and to the extent that we know around the world as well? And maybe Rob, could you take that one first?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Jeongmin probably go into a lot more detail on this. I mean, obviously, North Korean media has stressed the importance of basic hygiene, and has reported heavily on the spread of coronavirus in places outside of North Korea. I think up until recently, they did quite a few reports on the situation in South Korea. Now that the situation has gotten a bit better, you could argue in South Korea that the reports in North Korean media, to my knowledge, have kind of dropped off a bit. State media has detailed quarantines and releases from isolation, that sort of thing, and they've obviously also shut down the schools, as Jeongmin mentioned. They've extended, at least to our knowledge, they've extended the school vacation up until April 15th, which is Kim Il Sung's birthday, and it's a pretty big deal. It's the second time that they've extended the winter kind of break, and from what our sources have told us, that's never really happened before. State media has also told people they must wear masks in public, as I think Jeongmin already mentioned. We heard a report last week that people in Haesan, in Rangang province, on the border with China, are having patrols, essentially walking around, making sure that people are wearing masks, and these patrols are made up of medical students. And other people from the social organizations in the country. And sources have also told us that the officials are trying to stay upbeat in general on a local level. Got a report, I think 2 weeks ago, that officials in one part of the country are telling people that we just need to wait until the weather gets better. They should just wait another month. And things will get better, restrictions will loosen, that sort of thing. And that also corresponds maybe with the upcoming April 15th celebrations, Kim Il Sung's birthday. The North Korean officials may be trying to drum up this hope that we can beat this thing by that time. And on top of all this, obviously North Korea is, in terms of information, they've spent a lot of time and effort to block information from coming into the country and preventing information from coming out. That's nothing new. But we've heard that the authorities are cracking down on the flow of information about coronavirus in the country specifically. And in February, we got a report that North Koreans have been arrested for sending mobile texts regarding the coronavirus. The texts were, I think, innocuous. I don't think they were necessarily talking about the number of people who had been, affected or that sort of thing. There was just a mention of the coronavirus. But that was enough, it seemed, for authorities to bring those people in for questioning.
Okay. Jeongmin, would you like to add anything to that in terms of
Sure.
either government statement messaging or?
So the gist is that they have been spending a lot of time and pouring a lot of effort in creating this daily updates on coronavirus in North Korean state media. Especially if you see Rodong, they were dedicating for weeks now, like 1/3 of a page on page 4, page 5, to let the domestic audience know about the domestic situation, about the quarantine measures that the party is taking, which is basically a propaganda, but they are informing the domestic audience of how many people are quarantined, which they call medical quarantined, and what kind of places are being disinfected and this and that. And also, in Rodong, there is a usual section where they talk about international news. It was usually about bad news that's around the world, but these days, the international news section is mostly about coronavirus. And you can see there how they are quoting WHO from time to time and trying to inform the domestic audience of what the WHO is saying about the daily routines that people should have in order to prevent the spread of coronavirus. So I can say that they are trying to show this image that they are informing their domestic audience very responsibly. So according to what the state media has been saying, it's a different number from what maybe Rob heard from his sources, but what's open in the open source information says that 380 people, 80 foreigners were quarantined until now, and 3 are left. And the known number of citizens quarantined province by province is near 10,000. And until now, I think as of March 19, around more than 8,000 has been released, which shows that they are becoming a little more confident with how they are managing the situation. But still, it was a lot of people quarantined. Their main line of propaganda is that the parties work on implementing national emergency quarantine system, which started on January 30th, and super special quarantine measure, which is 초특급 방역 조치. That started to be talked about in Rodong after Kim Jong-un held the Politburo meeting. These two line of propaganda are continuing to say that there are 0 cases, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs also boasted of a clean land, which is a very unusual statement. And KCTV also has been pouring a lot of effort in making the coronavirus-related news look news-like rather than propaganda. And they continue to say that coronavirus prevention is a matter of national survival and like an important political duty to safeguard the country. And this line of propaganda has been repeatedly said since late January. And we have to talk about the Politburo meeting too, right? Because it was a very important meeting, and Kim Jong-un held it to mainly discuss anti-epidemic measures. 2 top officials were sacked, but we cannot exactly say that they were sacked because of coronavirus measures. Although some reports were interpreting it that way, they were sacked because of party cadre training center thing. And also recently, Rodong Shinmun, in a very unusual report, said that 1 local official in Cheonnae County of Gangwon province was demoted, expelled from party ranks for not following quarantine rules and having a drinking party. So all these point to the image that they want to present, like the responsible, normal country and the leadership that takes care of the national crisis. And these pictures, Sokeel, are you showing it?
Yeah, you can slide through as well. I just thought that as we're talking about
Oh,
this,
yes, I forgot about these. So these are some of the pictures that I accumulated from state media. So they are continuing to show these pictures, which is clearly staged, using personal protective equipment like hazmat suit and disinfectants that they are, this is a port where they are disinfecting the cargoes and leaving them for 10 days. And they're continuing to show this to the domestic audience. And these are the products that North Korea is claiming to produce right now. These are disinfectants and the sanitizers and soaps and masks. And look at them. Those are boxes of masks. And they're also using mobile phones to inform them of important information, like you said. And they are continuously showing North Koreans wearing masks, but they have been very inconsistent at first, because in some of the pictures, some are wearing masks, and then in another picture, there's like a public gathering where people aren't wearing masks. And these are some of the pictures that I'll talk about later. They were using different types of hazmat suits in North Korea.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's worth noting as well that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like actually, even though the North Korean government obviously has this very strong instinct for not being transparent at all, and to, for instance, like just denying that there's any cases inside the country, which is probably implausible. And there's plenty of evidence at this point that there has been an outbreak. But, you talked about how the state media is giving numbers of people who have been quarantined, and whether those numbers are accurate or not, it seems somewhat unprecedented that they would even release that level of detail. That's numbers of people that are quarantined. It doesn't necessarily mean that those people have it. It may just be that, they've had contact with the outside world, and so they're taking precautions, kind of thing. But I guess it shows how seriously the North Korean government is taking this, both from an actual on the ground measures perspective, but also in terms of how much they're pumping into the state media messaging on this, how much they're focusing on it, both, as you say, creating this picture that they're really putting a lot into protecting the people inside the country, and then also talking about how much of a crisis this is around the world. And that one thing, obviously near the start of this epidemic, after all of the focus was on China, one of the next countries was South Korea, where we are right now. And there was a lot of concern around the world about South Korea. There was, an early outbreak here. Obviously, thankfully, it looks like that curve has been able to be flattened, but it seems like that has been messaged pretty strongly in North Korea in terms of how bad the situation is in South Korea, right? And then not talking about that it may have stabilized and got better. And so I've actually heard from North Korean friends who are now in South Korea, become refugees and now living in South Korea, that people in North Korea, they may be actually worried about the situation in South Korea, because they don't necessarily know how bad it is in their country and in their area, but they're hearing a lot about how bad it is in South Korea. So it's such a different information situation inside North Korea to basically the whole of the rest of the world right now.
Right.
Given that, I think it would be really interesting to learn a little bit, beyond the immediate information about coronavirus. Just how are you guys actually able to get this kind of information about North Korea pretty much in real time? Not a lot of people around the world are able to do that, to report in real time on a situation as important as what's happening with the coronavirus inside North Korea. As you both said, they try to not let this information go out, and they will punish people that try and send that information or share it with the outside world and so on. And so, Jeongmin, maybe you could start a little bit and give an overview of NK News and what kind of sources you have and how you were able to do journalism on North Korea, probably the most difficult place to do journalism on.
Sure. So we do have sources inside North Korea, diplomatic sources and whatnot, but it's very difficult. It's a very careful decision that we have to make, because we have to think about their safety as well when we report on something. And although usually people use the two sources rule when they're reporting on something, in North Korea, the situation is sometimes different because people are hearing different things. So although we do have sources in North Korea, our reports are also based on open source information, like I said, that requires a very tight tracking system. We monitor KCTV, KCNA, Rodong, Shinmun, and externally focused outlets, and also activities of North Korea-related NGOs, IGOs, and North Korean diplomats stationed abroad, trade data, airports, and also there are companies related to North Korea that gives us like a little bit of pieces at a time to let us know what the bigger picture is all about. And especially like this COVID case, reporting in North Korea, it's sort of like finding like little puzzle pieces to that give us a better view on what the bigger picture is, and the bigger picture is never really fully known. So what we consider very important is baselining, because when it comes to state media and other open source media monitoring, North Korea has a specific way of reporting and making information known. And we have to note that note what's not only reported but also omitted, and like the patterns or whether or not they're breaking from the patterns. So we're trying to avoid like cherry picking reporting that many media does, looking at what's grabbing their attention and making a better headline rather than you know, solid baselining. So mostly we are basing our reports on sources and also open source information.
Okay, great, thanks. By the way, Jeongmin, I don't know if it's just for me, but your webcam seems to have gone down. I don't know if that's a connection issue, but maybe we can get that back. And Rob, could you give us an overview of Daily NK and you know, even UMG as well? You know, all of the amazing work that's being done within that group.
Yeah, so you mentioned this in the beginning, but you know, Daily NK is part of a consortium headed by the Unification Media Group, or UMG. And this consortium, obviously, you know, it includes Daily NK, but also includes Radio Free Joseon and Open North Korea Radio. And so UMG's main focus, UMG itself, not Daily NK, main focus is on providing North Koreans with open access to information, and the organization actually broadcasts radio content up to North Korea on a daily basis, so that they have essentially sending radio programs into North Korea, similar to what, you know, maybe Radio Free Asia, I think VOA, other organizations do. And you know, all this is obviously aimed at breaking what you know, we're terming the information blockade set up by the North Korean government. And you know, UMG and its umbrella organizations, including Daily NK, you know, are funded from grants from the U.S. government, other sources in South Korea and abroad. You know, specifically, Daily NK, you know, was formed in 2005. And its claim to fame has essentially been providing, you know, market information, a lot of economic related information. So sources in markets throughout the country essentially relay information about market prices back to our office in Seoul, and we've been able to kind of track changes in market prices. And we're not the only organization that does that. These press and some other organizations do that as well. But that's a major kind of thing that we've been doing. But we also have sources throughout North Korea that you know, provide insight, including Pyongyang, that provide insight into you know, policies that the North Korean government has implemented. So, for example, we've done a lot of work on agricultural reform, that sort of thing. We've covered over the years. How well is that being implemented in certain places? Well, our sources have been able to give us some insight into that sort of thing. And you know, I think we get, you know, a lot of questions about how reliable our sources are, and it's a completely fair question. It's a question that needs to be asked. I think that you know, many of our sources have you know, we've been working with them for many years, spent a lot of time and energy to train them, and they've provided many kind of breaking stories that have later been confirmed by, in some cases, North Korean state media. So, I mean, recently we had a story run about the closure of schools in North Korea, and that was later reported in state media a week later. And so we've had to luckily, with the coronavirus situation, we haven't faced, to my knowledge, a situation where the sources have we've been getting less information from North Korea, but we have heard obviously that it's harder to make international calls, for example, in the border region. And obviously a lot of, I can't go into the details obviously, but a lot of the communication that happens between the Seoul office, the journalists in our Seoul office, and the stringers in North Korea, you happen through text message or through phone, that sort of thing. And so we faced, I think, luckily not too many issues in terms of communication as of this time. But it's constantly something that is on our minds, because obviously a North Korean caught by security forces talking to anyone outside of the country, much less a South Korean news agency, could face pretty extreme punishment. And so there's a lot of security protocols involved in protecting sources, and that's why we don't have a lot of information about them, even about our journalists on our website, largely because of security concerns.
Well, all the work that you do and for giving us that overview. It's really fascinating how both of your organizations are able to get real-time information out of the country from various parts of the country and various types of sources and so on. I realize that a lot of the people tuning into this call right now will be familiar with our organization, LOTI, in North Korea, but there may be some people that aren't, and there may be some people that are tuning into this when the video is available offline that aren't familiar. So briefly about LINK, we're an international NGO that works with the North Korean people to help them achieve their liberty. Our main on-the-ground program is working with North Korean refugees, so people who've escaped north into China and then are trying to get all the way through China and Southeast Asia to safe and free resettlement in South Korea, the United States, or elsewhere. And we do that journey with them, helping them make it in the past 2 years, we've been able to help just over 500 people to make that journey. But this year, because of the situation on the border, starting from the North Korean side, but then of course, the very restricted travel in China this year, it's been almost impossible to bring people through. And so that has been affected. Beyond our work with North Korean refugees in China and Southeast Asia, we're also working with people who have reached safety and freedom to try and provide a platform and trying to help people to be advocates, change makers, and leaders on this issue. And so to throw in a relevant point, it echoes what you said, Rob. We're also hearing that, our North Korean friends in South Korea, it's more difficult for them to be in contact with their family or friends in North Korea because of the increased border crackdown, right? Even using the phones that are smuggled in from China, that seems to be more difficult. Sending money to their relatives in North Korea, that seems to have become more difficult. And so it's really affecting, it seems, a lot of North Korean people in a lot of different ways. I will now take questions that are being put to us from the audience. If you have a question which is to a specific person, then please note that when you write it. Otherwise, we'll just see who wants to take it, kind of thing. We already have some questions in there. Feel free to put your question in there. I'm sorry, we probably won't be able to get to all of them because there are quite a few, but I'll start with this one. So we've talked about why the North Korean government may not be telling the truth about COVID-19 inside North Korea, but historically, we've seen them release information about floods and droughts and other kinds of natural disasters and so on. And so why would they withhold more information maybe on this kind of situation compared to natural disasters? What would be your analysis on that? And whoever wants to jump in on that. Rob, do you want to make a
Yeah,
take a
well,
stab?
I think it's interesting just looking last year with the African swine fever outbreak. The fact that North Korea actually did admit that there was an outbreak, they just never admitted to the extent of the outbreak. And I think that kind of follows the pattern. I mean, North Korea has obviously never been transparent, but it's been just a little bit transparent about major kind of health issues in the country. And so I think with floods and droughts, I think it's a good question. I think that again, you're talking about state media saying that X number of people, X number of buildings, X number whatever have been, X number of people have died, X number of buildings have been destroyed, but that might not really reveal the full extent. And so last year, I know with Typhoon Ling, they did, state media did announce, specific numbers, specific areas of damage. But from what we've heard at Sino-NK at least, the damage was probably much more severe and potentially damaging to the country's agricultural output, actually. And that's something that, that's not a short-term problem, it's a long-term problem, potentially. And so, I think at the end of the day, North Korea's been frustratingly, they've just been a little bit transparent, but they're never really telling the whole story with these type of things.
Sure. And we have a question from Jordan, which is on international assistance. Has there been any international assistance, between North Korea and neighboring countries or the international community? Are there any prospects for that? Or has there been talk on that? Jeongmin,
yes, I can take that question.
That? Yeah.
Yes. There were UN agencies and non-governmental organizations that received sanctions exemptions from the United Nations in late February. IFRC, WHO, and MSF, which is Doctor Without Borders, they were all exempted for shipping personal protective equipment and COVID test kits into North Korea. And however, it's not known if the cargoes made it into North Korea. There are different reports on this. UNICEF this week said that the delivery has been delayed, and much of the cargoes seem to be stuck in Tandong, China right now and not going into North Korea yet. And we don't know why, but we can presume that maybe they're not confident yet about opening the borders, or maybe something going on in Siniju. And even if the cargoes go in, they would have to go through 10 days quarantine period, which means that they would not be able to use the test kits right away. Russian government sent 1,500 test kits, but I don't think that's barely enough, because there are probably more than 10,000 people who have been under quarantine until now. So there is a prospect for more international assistance, but the environment, I should say, is that already very unfavorable for the organizations.
We also had a couple of questions from our audience on the economic impacts of this. So whether that be in the Changmadang, the market economy, or on the more official side, trade, smuggling. What can we talk about the broader economic impacts? Obviously, that's been part of the story around the world, with how much this has affected societies and movement and trade and so on. What's the situation in North Korea? And Rob, maybe do you want to jump on this?
Yeah, so I think the coronavirus and definitely the shutdown of the Sino-North Korean border has, you could say, kind of exacerbated issues North Korea faced due to international sanctions over the last couple of years. And in terms of sanctions, we know that in some areas sanctions haven't really had much impact. For example, North Korea has continued to dispatch workers into China. with little regard to international sanctions. I mean, we received reports in mid-January, just before the border was shut down, that North Korea was still sending or planning to send labor workers into the country, even though, obviously North Korean workers in China now are, to the best of our knowledge, still under lockdown. They're not really working in the factories. We also know that, sanctions have had little impact on really Sino-North Korean trade. State-run and private smuggling operations have continued despite sanctions. And there appears to be, there was a brief lull perhaps in smuggling over the border right before the North Korean Chinese border was shut down in January, but it seems reports we're getting now suggest that the smuggling operations are starting up again. Obviously, North Korea reportedly asked the Chinese if they could restart trade over the border, but at least from our reports, the Chinese refused to do that. And so it seems to be more kind of focused on smuggling operations as opposed to more kind of official trade between the two countries. And obviously we've heard a lot about the impact of sanctions on local markets, or the Dangmadang. A merchant in Pyongyang, near Pyongyang last year, told Daily NK that traders are were facing reduced income because sales have dropped and the consumers are not buying as much in the markets as anymore. And most of the purchasing focuses on what he would call cheap corn and vegetables at local markets. They're not buying electronics. They're not buying more expensive stuff, maybe compared to years past before the introduction of these serious sanctions in 2017. And the closure of the Sino-North Korean border has led to reports that commodity prices now, such as price and fuel, have skyrocketed to levels never seen actually during the last couple of years. And so the shutdown of the Sino-North Korean border has really made a huge impact on the economy, from what we're hearing. And then also going back to sanctions in the past, I mean, sanctions were fairly effective in shutting down coal exports and fuel imports. And we know that coal mines, for example, were hit particularly hard by sanctions. And the shutdown on the Sino-North Korean border recently has only exacerbated that. And so we heard that the country's largest coal mine in Busan is now working at less than 50% of full capacity. And fuel imports have also been hit. Fishermen, and this is, again, a lot of this is historically, sanctions have really hurt fishermen because they haven't been able to acquire diesel fuel from the state as much because of international sanctions, and so all of those things have probably been exacerbated due to the close of the border. And what also can be noted is that international sanctions are cited frequently by the North Korean state media, and so people, even sources that we've talked to, they blame sanctions in cases where it's not necessarily clear
Right.
the sanctions are at fault, but there is kind of a propaganda effect there in terms of creating an impression that sanctions are really negatively impacting the economy.
Sure. Okay. We have another question from Kelly this time, and maybe Jeongmin, you can take this. So this is rumors maybe, but they've been reported sufficiently around the world, or they've got attention. So maybe we can address this. Basically about the North Korean government just simply killing infected people inside North Korea. Do you think that there's any evidence or truth to that? And Jeongmin first, and Rob, if you want to jump in, do so.
I think Rob is a better person to talk about this, but there's no evidence in state media, but they are being very strict about this issue, and because they are trying to insist that there are 0 cases in North Korea, if there are infections, they would take measures that will be not known to the world. Rob? I think I remember reading something about this in the NK.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a specific article, I think it was in the Telegraph, don't quote me on that, that was talking about, it was strangely sourced. I think I traced the back of it from a Korean language Donga Ilbo article written by defector
주성아.
Yeah, Juseong.
Yeah.
And he he has sources in North Korea, and it may have been based off of that. And Daily K hasn't, to my knowledge, reported on any killings.
Us neither.
Yeah, so I would take all of that with a grain of salt. A lot of those stories get circulated very quickly through the international media, but also in South Korea. And, that would require, a great deal of kind of confirmation.
Verification process.
If there's just one source, then it's hard to take that.
Exactly, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And we are sadly, we'll soon be running out of time, but we've had a couple of questions on the potential situation of COVID-19 spread in North Korean detention facilities, including from Greg at HRNK. Hi, Greg. And so, Rob, could you maybe share anything that you know from sources about the virus in detention facilities in North Korea, in the Kyowaso, or anything like that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think we've gotten 2 reports over the last month about that. The most recent one, which I think I briefly mentioned at the beginning of this, involved the mass death of 11 people at the Cheongori concentration camp in North Hamgyong province. And the details are honestly a little bit murky, because it's the 11 reportedly suffered from respiratory issues and also fevers. But as we know, I mean, these are people working in very difficult labor and living environments. There's no real certainty whether coronavirus played a role. Obviously, the authorities at the Jeongori prison have tried to downplay the impact of coronavirus on those deaths. I mean, they really haven't released obviously information about that to internally, but it's similarly to maybe soldiers as well. You have people gathered in one place, and there's a potential for an outbreak, but in many of the cases, it's really hard to confirm. I mean, our sources aren't necessarily medically trained and can't always, it's a very difficult situation to confirm whether coronavirus plays a role in all of these deaths. But it's, I think, it's something that you can imagine happening rationally. But unfortunately, we just don't have, I think, the level of confirmation that we'd like to at the.
Sorry, I was muted there. So it's almost time to wrap up, but some people have asked this, and I think it's important to get to it as well. If people are interested in learning more and also ways to help North Korean people and help organizations working on North Korea, where would you point us to, and what would be your call to actions there? And maybe, again, we could start with Rob on that. And then Jeongmin, you can share, how we can learn more and how we can support the North Korean people.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in terms of information, you can sign up for our newsletter. We put out a weekly newsletter that provides kind of a breakdown of all the news from the week, and I think that information about North Korea always has to be taken with a grain of salt. I think in the case of Daily NK, a lot of our reports, as you'll note when you're reading them, they are they provide sometimes snapshots of what's going on in regions of the country. Someone based in, for example, in North Hamgyong province, is reasonably going to know what's happening there, but because of the difficulty in terms of mobility, in terms of communication throughout the country, the information that we're getting are essentially snapshots, and it has to be treated as such, I think, in many cases. Although we do report on certain national policies, for example, school closures, that's going to affect the entire country. So I think, if I encourage those listening, if they're interested in kind of getting that sort of insight into North Korea, then you can sign up for our newsletter. Check us out at our website.
Yeah, sure. And it seems people are already clicking on that, but that link is right there at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to reach out to Daily NK and UMG. They're doing really great work on this issue. And Jeongmin as well. Could you share how people can follow up with your organization?
Sure. We have data tools that you can see, and also we are tracking a lot of sanctions issues. If you are interested in the works of international government, international NGOs and NGOs that help North Korea. If you want to get hard facts, I think NK News and NK Pro is a good platform for you to use, because we track them and we discern between what's important or not. And there's a very big accumulated data set of what has been going on in North Korea. Also, on Monday, we are launching a COVID-19 tracker related to North Korea, and we are working on this right now. That includes the timeline of what has been happening in North Korea regarding the pandemic, and we are also developing a lot of tool sets that can help you track what's actually happening inside North Korea. So if you click on the link, you will be able to access the tool on Monday.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And as somebody who's worked on North Korea for a few years now, it's been great to be able to learn so much from the work that you guys have been doing. Whether you're a journalist or a practitioner or an academic, if you're interested in North Korea, then Daily NK and NK News are really the two indispensable sources of real-time information on North Korea. So thank you for your work in general, and also thank you for joining today. In terms of if people are interested in Link's work, one of the things that you could start with, if you've not already, is watching our documentary, the Jeongmin Generation. That's the latest documentary that we've produced. And if you like, share it with friends and family who may have a little bit of time these days to watch documentaries. And this is really hard to get the finger pointing in the right direction. There should be a link down there for you. Thank you all so much for joining. Tomorrow, you should receive an email with a recording of this event in your inbox. Please feel free to share that with anybody who might be interested in watching but couldn't join the discussion live. We hope that you found this informative. This is the first time that we're doing this kind of event, and so we are very interested in your suggestions and feedback. Right after this call ends, please don't X out the window, because though it will go directly to a very quick survey, and that'll be really helpful for us to learn about, how this went for you, and if there's any improvements we can make, and also ideas for future events. So thank you so much, Rob and Jeongmin, for joining early in the morning over here. Thank you to all of our audience for joining from wherever you are around the world. And don't forget to wash your hands.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.